Harlan pushed through the revolving doors of the Whitmore Grand in Las Vegas, dragging a battered suitcase that scraped the marble floor. Evelyn Cross's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "That suitcase looks like it came from a flea market." He kept his tone steady. "I only need a room." Her gaze dropped to his shoes, the hollow sound echoing as he walked. "Those clunky shoes ruin the image of this hotel," she sneered. Clarence Holt, the security guard, stepped forward, his hand hovering near Harlan's arm. "Sir, you'll have to leave." Around them, guests in designer clothes turned to watch. One couple smirked, another shook their heads with pity. Harlan stood frozen for a breath, the sting of humiliation burning hotter than the Nevada sun outside. Then, with a final shove, Clarence guided him toward the glass doors. Harlan spoke to the listener as if sharing a memory. "I once worked as a busboy in Texas. I was invisible, just the kid who cleared tables. Some nights a manager would remind me of my place. 'You're just a runner, nothing more.'" The words had carved themselves into his mind. Now, years later, he wanted to know whether people inside his own empire had grown arrogant, whether they would treat ordinary guests with contempt. He peeled away every sign of wealth. The tailored vest was folded away, the polished watch locked in a drawer. He buttoned a faded polo shirt, laced up scuffed shoes that echoed on the floor, and lifted a suitcase with frayed seams. When he stepped into the back seat of a yellow cab, he looked like any man carrying the weight of modest means. That was the point. He wanted to walk through the doors as a stranger. The cab rolled on, and his mind drifted backward. He was 17 again, working in a diner where grease clung to every surface. A manager leaned close, spitting the words into his ear. "You'll never be more than a table runner." The sting of humiliation had been worse than the ache in his legs after 12 hours of serving. He remembered staring at the cracked tiles of the kitchen floor, feeling smaller than the mop bucket by his feet. That night, he swore that if he ever built something of his own, no customer would be belittled for who they were or what they wore. Decades had passed, fortunes had been made, but that wound had never healed. Tonight, the wound would guide him. He wanted to see if his hotels still remembered the promise he had made to his younger self. The yellow cab curved onto the strip lights blazing in every direction. Towers of glass shimmered with neon reflections, giant screens flashing ads for high-roller suites and endless champagne. The driver chuckled, glancing at Harlan in the rearview mirror. "Whitmore Grand." "That's millionaire territory. You sure you're at the right address?" The words hung in the air like a taunt. Harlan only gave a dry smile. He tugged at the collar of his faded shirt, feeling the rough fabric against his neck. The closer they drew to the towering entrance, the more it seemed like another world, one built for people wrapped in silk and leather, not men carrying battered luggage. As the cab pulled up to the marble steps, he gripped the suitcase handle. He was walking straight into the test, knowing every eye would decide if he belonged or not. The cab pulled away, leaving Harlan alone before the marble steps. Above him, the glowing sign read, "Whitmore Grand" in gold against the desert night. The letters seemed to challenge him, daring him to enter. He stood still for a moment, gripping the worn handle of his suitcase, feeling the pulse in his fingertips. Guests in silk gowns brushed past, their laughter echoing under the bright lights. He inhaled deeply, as if drawing courage from the air itself. Quietly, almost to himself, he whispered, "If I don't test this now, I'll never know the truth." The revolving doors spun steadily, ushering strangers in, shutting others out. His reflection flashed in the glass, an ordinary man about to step into extraordinary scrutiny. Every step forward meant leaving comfort behind, stepping into a game where dignity itself was the stake. Inside the lobby, a figure commanded the room without speaking. Evelyn Cross. Her hair was pulled tight, each strand controlled, not a gesture wasted. She adjusted the lapel of her dark vest and scanned the space with a cool detachment, eyes like a judge weighing worth. The staff shifted nervously as she passed, straightening posture, giving her the right of way. A bellman halted mid-step, bowing slightly before continuing. No smile softened her face. There was only calculation, a scale measuring profit against presence. For the audience, there was no question she was power-wrapped in disdain, the embodiment of polished cruelty. Every look dismissed someone, every pause implied judgment. In her silence, arrogance spoke louder than words. The stage had its antagonist, and she wore authority like armor. Moments later, a limousine purred to a stop outside. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, and Evelyn's face transformed. Her lips curved into a smile as polished as the marble beneath her heels. She moved quickly, greeting him with warmth, her voice honeyed, her gestures deferential. Champagne appeared almost instantly a symbol of favor. Then her eyes drifted past the suited guest, landing on Harlan with his worn suitcase and faded shirt. The smile dissolved. Her brows pinched, and the same mouth that had poured compliments tightened into disapproval. Two faces within seconds, adoration for wealth, contempt for modesty. The contrast rang clear. She bowed to those above and crushed those below. Harlan, standing in her line of sight, felt the weight of her judgment. He had entered her game, and she had already chosen her side. Edgar and Lillian Boone entered the lobby hand in hand, carrying a bouquet of roses wrapped in bright paper. 40 years of marriage, and tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Their smiles carried the weight of expectation as they approached the front desk. Troy Beckett, the clerk behind the counter, barely lifted his eyes. "You'll need to wait." "2 more hours," he said flatly. The flowers drooped in Lillian's hands as her expression faltered. Edgar cleared his throat, trying to remain patient. Around them, other guests drifted past, some greeted with wide smiles, some escorted swiftly to their rooms. But for the Boones, there was only delay. They sat quietly near the lobby's edge, their anniversary marked not with champagne but with indifference. The audience could sense it, kindness withheld, dignity traded for convenience. From a few steps away, Harlan noticed the bouquet trembling slightly in Lillian's hand. He thought of his own parents, their gray hair the way they once held hands walking down a dusty Texas street. His chest tightened. Is this how they treat the old? He wondered. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, jotting a single line. The scribble was brief, but it carried weight, evidence of a culture that had forgotten respect. He tucked the notebook away, his jaw set firm. Sympathy turned to resolve, like a spark catching fire. Watching the Boones wait in silence, he felt the test deepening. This wasn't just about one insult at a doorway. It was about an entire system of contempt laid bare in marble halls. Not long after Naomi Price stepped to the counter, her voice polite but steady. "Excuse me, may I ask about check-in time?" Marla Dorsey glanced up, then quickly looked away. Without eye contact, her reply was clipped, almost dismissive. "Just wait." No explanation, no courtesy. Naomi stood still, her fingers tightening around her purse strap, irritation flashing in her eyes. Guests behind her exchanged glances, some awkward, some knowing. Harlan, from his corner, took in the entire exchange. He saw the invisible lines being drawn, service for one kind of guest, silence for another. The lobby's crystal lights gleamed overhead, but beneath them the ugliness of prejudice was undeniable. The audience would feel it too, fairness, broken humanity stripped away in a single word. A Rolls-Royce eased to the curb, and Evelyn's expression brightened instantly. She swept toward the entrance, all smiles, her voice warm as silk for the wealthy passenger stepping out. Cameras flashed, champagne glasses appeared as if by command. But the glow faded the moment she turned and spotted Naomi still waiting at the counter. Her tone cut sharp. "You need to be patient. This isn't fast food." The words stung in their cruelty, reducing dignity to an afterthought. Naomi lowered her gaze, swallowing her frustration, shoulders stiff with quiet humiliation. Around them, the contrast was striking, adoration for one, contempt for another. The audience would feel the dissonant service offered like worship to luxury, dismissal thrown like scraps to those outside the circle. Evelyn had revealed herself completely, her hierarchy was carved in disdain. On the 5th floor, Rosa Delgado worked carefully, polishing every surface. Her hands moved with routine care, but Evelyn stormed in unannounced. She scanned the room like a hawk seeking prey, and her eyes caught a single glass on the dresser not yet fully dry. Her voice tore through the silence. "Pathetic. A 5-star hotel cannot keep clumsy staff like you." Rosa froze the cloth, trembling in her grip. She bowed her head, tears forming as she whispered nothing in her defense. The sting of injustice hung heavy. She had given effort, but all Evelyn saw was imperfection. For those watching, it was cruelty distilled, a hard-working employee crushed by deliberate malice. Rosa's quiet sobs against the backdrop of luxury etched the image deeper than any words could. Downstairs, Jamal Rivers carried luggage with steady arms, his smile genuine. A guest handed him a tip, and he bowed gratefully, sincerity shining in the simple exchange. Yet Evelyn's eyes cut through the moment. She barked, "Stop wasting time with these kinds of guests. Focus on the VIPs." The kindness in Jamal's gesture was trampled by her scorn. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, swallowing the sting for the sake of his job. His silence was not weakness, it was endurance. For the audience, the contrast was painful. A man who valued respect, punished for showing it. Jamal's quiet restraint, his fists tightening at his sides, became another piece of evidence in Harlan's growing case. Evelyn had not just insulted a worker, she had dismissed decency itself. Harlan approached the desk, his voice calm. "Could I have a bottle of water?" Troy Beckett leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk. "Water is for VIP guests. If you want some, there's a vending machine down the hall." The words landed heavy, deliberate. Harlan's eyes flicked to the counter just a few feet away, rows of complimentary bottles lined neatly offered to anyone deemed worthy. The sight made the dismissal sharper, the lie exposed in plain view. Guests nearby saw it too, yet no one spoke. It wasn't about the water, it was about belonging. A simple request denied not by policy, but by prejudice. For Harlan, the insult was small, but piercing another cut to dignity. For the audience, the absurdity was clear. In this palace of excess, even water had a price tag attached to status. Harlan stayed quiet, deciding to wait, but the ridicule did not stop. Marla leaned toward Troy, her voice low but sharp enough to carry. "He looks like he's homeless." Troy chuckled, nodding. Evelyn passed by at that moment, catching the exchange, and offered a faint nod of agreement as if to seal their cruelty. Harlan stood within earshot, every word lodging deeper than the last. He kept his face composed, though the humiliation pressed heavy against his chest. To the onlookers, the image was striking: a man dismissed not for what he had done, but for what they imagined he lacked. A hotel, meant to welcome instead, turned into a theater of mockery. The audience, hearing the sneers and seeing Harlan endure, would feel both anger at the insult and sympathy for his silence. Nearby, the Boones still sat waiting. Lillian shifted uncomfortably, pressing her hand to her lower back. "Edgar, my back hurts," she whispered. Edgar reached over, gently rubbing her hand, his eyes clouded with quiet sorrow. The bouquet of roses they had carried in now lay wilting on the seat beside them. Hours had passed, yet no one came to help. Harlan watched his fists tightening at his sides. Their patience, their dignity was being tested by neglect. Around them, staff rushed to cater to wealthy arrivals, yet the elderly couple remained invisible. The image cut deep. Two people who should have been honored on their anniversary left to ache in silence. For Harlan, it was no longer an experiment. It was a reckoning. For the audience, compassion swelled, but so did fury at the injustice. Harlan stepped closer to the desk, his tone steady, though his chest burned. "Why have these guests been waiting so long?" He gestured toward the Boones, still seated with their roses drooping. Evelyn turned her eyes on him, her voice icy. "They booked the cheapest room. This hotel prioritizes people who pay more." The bluntness landed like a slap, stripping away the illusion of hospitality. Harlan froze, staring at her, the words echoing in his head. A hotel, built to serve all, had become a marketplace where worth was measured only in dollars. Around them, other guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke against her. For the audience, the shock was complete. Evelyn had laid bare the philosophy of greed, spoken without shame. What should have been service was now hierarchy, and the ugliness of it hung in the marble air. In a quiet act of defiance, Jamal slipped a chilled bottle of water from the service tray and offered it discreetly to the Boones. Edgar accepted it with a grateful nod, Lillian's eyes shining with relief. But Evelyn's gaze cut across the lobby, sharp as glass. "Jamal, do you want to lose your job?" Her voice carried, meant to humiliate. Jamal lowered his head, murmuring an apology, yet he still held his ground beside the weary couple. His presence alone was a shield, even as his career hung by a thread. The scene spoke volumes: kindness punished, cruelty rewarded. For those watching, Jamal's quiet courage was a lifeline of humanity in a place that had forgotten it. His risk was a proof that decency still lived even in the shadow of tyranny. Nearby, Naomi Price gathered her purse, her face tight with disappointment. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her departure was silent, but final. One guest lost, perhaps many more unseen. Harlan watched her leave a sigh pressing out of him. How many will walk away because of this indifference, he thought. His question hung unanswered, settling heavy in the stillness. The sight of her back disappearing through the glass doors marked more than one lost reservation. It was a measure of how the hotel squandered its soul. Harlan remained in his corner, eyes fixed on the lobby, gathering every detail. The audience would sense it, a pause, a breath before the storm, as frustration simmered and the stage braced for escalation. The shrill ring of Evelyn's phone cut through the air. She answered, her face lighting up with sudden urgency. "Our VIP has arrived," she declared. At once the front desk erupted in motion. Champagne bottles appeared from chilled trays. A crimson carpet unrolled across polished stone staff scurried to their stations like actors rehearsed for a show. And yet in the corner, Edgar and Lillian Boone still sat waiting, their roses drooping further, their backs slumped in exhaustion. The contrast was unbearable celebration for the wealthy, neglect for the faithful. Harlan watched, eyes darkening, the shadow of anger gathering. This was not hospitality. It was hierarchy carved into action. The audience could feel it, the injustice now at its peak, a spectacle of favoritism painted bright against the quiet suffering of those ignored. Harlan pushed his chair back, intending to leave before rage overtook him, but Clarence Holt, the security guard, stepped squarely into his path. "You're disturbing the image of this hotel," he said, his voice low but commanding. Guests turned their heads, whispers rippling through the lobby. All eyes shifted to Harlan, the man with the battered suitcase, standing accused for simply existing in the wrong attire. Evelyn stood nearby, arms folded, her expression carved in stone. "You should go," she added, cold and final, as if dismissing a nuisance rather than a guest. The humiliation was now public, each word a blade stripping him of dignity. The audience would feel the sting, confrontation in full view, the cruelty no longer hidden but displayed as policy. Clarence's grip tightened around Harlan's arm, forcing him toward the glass doors. The suitcase clattered to the floor, one wheel snapping off with a sickening crack. Gasps rippled from the crowd. "Oh my God!" a woman exclaimed, the shock breaking the silence. Yet Evelyn's face showed no hesitation. "Escort him out," she ordered, her tone as cold as steel. Clarence shoved again, and Harlan stumbled, his reflection flashing against the doors before the night air swallowed him. Guests stared, some with pity, some with discomfort, none daring to intervene. A man cast aside like refuse, not for crime or fault, but for not fitting the image. For the audience, the scene was explosive, a climax of injustice, burning with rage, the moment where endurance demanded retribution. Outside the glass doors, the night air hit Harlan like a wave. His chest rose and fell, breath ragged from anger more than exhaustion. Behind him, laughter and music spilled faintly from the lobby, a world that had rejected him minutes earlier. He looked at his broken suitcase, one wheel, bent, a symbol of everything stripped away. For a long moment he stood still, eyes fixed on the glowing sign above the hotel entrance. Then, in a voice only he could hear, he whispered, "Enough." The word carried finality, a decision forming in steel. This was no longer an experiment, it was an awakening. The audience could sense it too, the pause before a storm, the tightening of resolve, the knowledge that humiliation would not be the last chapter. The stage was set for confrontation, and Harlan was ready to return. Inside the grand ballroom, Evelyn basked in her own authority. Surrounded by staff, she spoke with smug delight. "I just threw out a beggar who thought he belonged here." Her words dripped with satisfaction, as though cruelty was a badge of honor. Several employees chuckled nervously, their laughter a mixture of obedience and fear. The chandeliers glittered above, reflecting her arrogance in every crystal shard. Rosa and Jamal exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent under her shadow. For the audience, the picture was vivid. A leader, drunk on power, blind to consequence, convinced her reign was untouchable. The boasting exposed her not just as cold, but as careless, feeding her ego in front of those who would soon witness her collapse. Every word she spoke dug the ground deeper beneath her feet. The ballroom doors swung wide, and silence fell like a curtain. Harlan entered, no longer the man with scuffed shoes and frayed polo. His suit was sharp, his tie knotted with precision, his presence commanding. Conversations died mid-sentence. Staff turned, eyes widening. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Jamal froze where he stood. Evelyn's smile collapsed, her face paling as recognition dawned. She took a step back, the arrogance draining from her posture. Harlan's gaze swept the room, steady and unyielding, his silence more powerful than any announcement. In that moment, the balance shifted completely. The beggar she had mocked was gone. The true owner of Whitmore Grand stood before them. For the audience, the satisfaction was instant. The long-awaited reversal had arrived, and justice was now inevitable. Harlan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "My name is Harlan Whitmore. I own this hotel." The words struck the room like thunder. Chairs scraped as employees instinctively stepped back, and eyes-wide murmurs rippling through the crowd. Rosa gasped, Jamal's jaw dropped, and even the usually smug Troy stumbled over his footing. Evelyn shook her head, lips trembling, as she stammered, That can't be true." But the certainty in his eyes, the authority in his presence, left no room for doubt. The man they had mocked as unworthy now stood revealed as their employer, the one whose signature rested on every paycheck. The audience would feel the electricity of reversal. The humiliation flipped the predator suddenly cornered. Justice was no longer abstract. It had a face, and it was his. Harlan lifted a remote, and the ballroom lights dimmed. A screen flickered to life, displaying the morning's lobby footage. Evelyn's voice echoed, sharp and cruel, "This hotel doesn't host people like you." Gasps filled the room as Troy was shown sneering at Naomi Marla, rolling her eyes and laughing, Clarence dragging a guest by the arm. Each clip unfolded like a confession, undeniable and raw. Faces turned toward the guilty eyes, narrowing judgment spreading through the crowd. Rosa looked down, her hands clenched in anger at the memory. Jamal stared straight ahead, vindicated by truth. Evelyn's face drained of color as her own words replayed each syllable another nail in the coffin of her authority. The evidence was not hearsay, it was reality projected for all to see. Desperate, Evelyn forced a shaky smile. This was all a misunderstanding. I was only her excuse collapsed under Harlan's glare. Silence. The single word froze her where she stood. The authority had shifted completely. The staff who once cowered before her now lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet his gaze. Troy fidgeted. Marla shrank into herself. Clarence crossed his arms, but said nothing. The air thickened with shame, every second of quiet pressing heavier than the last. Evelyn's power evaporated, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. No defense could stand against what the room had seen. For the audience, the reversal was sharp and final, the villain stripped of her stage, the mask torn away, leaving only guilt in its rawest form. Harlan's voice rang through the ballroom, calm but unyielding. "Evelyn, Troy, Marla, Clarence, you are terminated immediately." The words sliced through the air with the weight of a gavel. Evelyn staggered forward, her hands trembling. "Please, I've given years to this place." Troy stammered, his usual smugness gone. "It was just bad judgment." Marla's lips quivered. Clarence clenched his fists in silent defiance, but Harlan's expression did not waver. "There is no place in Whitmore Grand for cruelty. Your time here ends now." The room fell still, only the sound of shallow breathing filling the space. For the staff who had suffered under them, justice arrived not as whispers, but as thunder. The audience would savor the moment arrogance collapsed into pleading, and authority was restored through truth. Then Harlan turned his gaze, finding Rosa at the edge of the crowd. "Rosa Delgado," he called gently, motioning her forward. She hesitated, eyes wide, before stepping into the light. "You are proof that kindness survives even when buried under arrogance." Her hands shook as he continued. "You will be promoted, and your salary increased. From this day forward, the hotel stands with you." Tears welled and slipped down her cheeks as she pressed a hand to her chest, unable to form words. Applause broke out among the staff, honest and unforced. In Rosa's tears, the audience saw the weight of years of quiet labor finally acknowledged. This was more than reward. It was validation, a reminder that dignity had a place again within these walls. Harlan's gaze then sought Jamal, who stood tall, though his hands trembled at his sides. "Jamal Rivers." Harlan declared, "You embody the spirit of hospitality. You defended others when it cost you, and that courage defines what this hotel should stand for." Jamal's lips parted, but no words came, only a firm nod as his eyes glistened. Harlan stepped forward, offering his hand. Jamal grasped it, the shake firm and grateful. A ripple of applause filled the room again this time, louder, charged with admiration. For the audience, the moment was both triumphant and tender. A man punished for kindness now lifted high, his worth recognized publicly. Vindication had never felt so human, nor justice so deserved. Harlan's eyes found Edgar and Lillian Boone still seated near the back, their roses nearly wilted. He gestured for them to stand, his voice firm but warm. "Tonight should have been a celebration. Instead, you were made to wait. That ends now. You will be guests of Whitmore Grand in the Florida Keys, all expenses paid." Gasps filled the room, followed by applause. Edgar turned to his wife, pulling her into his arms as tears slid down his weathered cheeks. Lillian clutched the bouquet tighter, her smile trembling through sobs. In their embrace, the injustice of the lobby was washed away, replaced by recognition and dignity. For the audience, the moment was healing. Those dismissed as unimportant were honored openly, a balance restored not just with gifts, but with respect. Justice had come full circle. When the applause faded, Harlan addressed the room, his voice steady and resonant. A hotel can be built from stone and steel, but only kindness makes it a home. The words settled like truth, carried on air, reaching every corner of the ballroom. Staff lowered their heads, reflecting. Rosa wiped her eyes. Jamal stood taller, and even those who had laughed earlier stared down at the floor. Silence followed, not empty but heavy with meaning, as if the building itself had paused to listen. For the audience, it was a message beyond one hotel, an indictment of arrogance, a call to humanity. The sentence was short, but it echoed, long wealth builds walls, but only compassion opens doors. Harlan stepped down from the platform, moving first to Rosa. He placed his arms around her in a brief, firm embrace, the kind that carried gratitude and respect. Rosa's tears broke again, but this time they were tears of relief. Then he turned to Jamal, extending his hand. Jamal clasped it with both of his a firm shake that spoke louder than words. Around them, the staff erupted into applause, this time spontaneous and unified. The clapping grew louder, echoing through the ballroom, not as performance but as solidarity. The fractures caused by fear and cruelty had been mended in a single gesture. For the audience, the sight was powerful unity, reborn, dignity restored, and the reminder that one leader's example could redraw the culture of an entire house. Before the gathering dispersed, Harlan turned back to the Boones, their hands still clasped tightly together. "You are welcome here." Any time he said, his tone softer now, almost paternal. Edgar's throat tightened as he struggled to respond. Finally, he managed. This is the anniversary we will never forget. Not for the waiting, not for the pain, but because tonight proved dignity still matters." His voice cracked, and Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, the roses now cradled between them like a fragile promise. The ballroom fell quiet for a beat, honoring the weight of those words. For the audience, it was the gentle landing after a storm, the assurance that suffering had been turned into meaning. Justice had not only punished the guilty, it had restored faith for the innocent. Harlan's gaze swept across the staff, the authority in his voice tempered by resolve. "I will not stop here. This is only the first hotel I will test." A stir moved through the crowd, gasps, whispers, nervous glances exchanged like sparks. The implication was heavy. This reckoning would not be contained to one ballroom or one night. Every hotel carrying his name was now under scrutiny, every manager under watch. The promise was not revenge but reform, a ripple that would spread across an empire. For the audience, it was the perfect open door, a suggestion that more stories waited to unfold, more justice still to come. The curtain hadn't closed, it had only lifted higher, inviting expectation for what might be revealed next. A voice threaded back through the story, drawing the circle to its beginning. From a battered suitcase to shoes that echoed on marble to a single bottle of water withheld, every detail revealed the truth. The symbols of insult were now symbols of exposure, each one carrying more weight than gold-plated chandeliers or champagne flutes. What had seemed trivial, a sound, an object, a request, had unmasked arrogance at its core. The narrative had come full circle, reminding the listener that injustice is often found not in grand betrayals, but in the small cruelties repeated until they feel normal. For the audience, the satisfaction was complete. What started as humiliation had ended as revelation. The suitcase, the shoes, the water, all meaningless on their own, but together they had toppled an empire of pretense. Harlan's final words carried beyond the ballroom. "If you have ever been dismissed, remember this: your worth is not measured by a suitcase or the sound of your shoes. True value lives within you, untouched by appearances." His voice invited not pity, but strength, a reminder for everyone who had felt small in places built to impress. The message was personal, aimed at the audience as much as the staff. It was both comfort and challenge to see dignity where others refuse. The story closed with a simple invitation. If you believe kindness is worth more than wealth, leave a heart behind. No command, no demand, only a choice placed gently in the listener's hands. The call was clear: affirm the message, join the movement, or let silence speak instead. For the audience, it was not just interaction but belonging, a way to carry the story forward. The test no longer belonged only to Harlan, it now belonged to them. And never forget, this is only the beginning. More walls will fall, More truths will surface and more voices will be heard. If you believe power should answer to kindness, then don't just watch Stand With It. Share this story now. Let it reach someone who needs to remember their worth. Change doesn't wait for permission. It starts with one decision, one act, one voice. Be that voice. Because the next chapter isn't mine alone, it belongs to everyone who refuses to stay silent.